This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. All right, we've got some sponsors for the pod now.
Wait, what?
Every link you need for the things we talk about here is at artofdarkpod.com/sponsors. First up, books.
If you're into this podcast, odds are you're probably a reader. We've got links to buy new books from bookshop.org and used books from alibris.com.
And if you want to listen to your books, we recommend and use audible.com.
It's great, and the catalog is huge.
All right. So if you're listening to this, you are online.
Maybe you're very online.
You probably have a website or are thinking of starting one. Maybe you want a website like artofdarkpod.com. We built that with WordPress, which is by far the most popular way to create websites. And the single best host for serious WordPress is WP Engine. I've personally used them for over a decade now, and I don't host my websites anywhere else. Go to artofdarkpod.com/sponsors and click on the WP Engine link to learn more.
Finally, the best way to support the show is at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Get the bonus After Dark content for every episode, access to the book club, and more.
Thanks for supporting Art of Darkness. And I don't think that was too painful. I think we did a pretty good job there.
Yeah, that sounded good.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
I want to take a little sidetrack because the Aleph is symbolically one of his most interesting stories. I want to talk about his fascination with the Kabbalah just for a minute, because it seems relevant to me, and he's always sort of playing at it. He's always sort of suggesting his knowledge. And then in 1932, he writes an essay called A Defense of the Kabbalah. And I just want to read a couple paragraphs from it because I just think it's interesting. And so I'm just going to have it out here, and know that this is happening in Borges's head, right? And I guess here's an important note. Throughout his life, Borges, despite being almost undoubtedly some kind of mystic, is agnostic. He doesn't really go for his mother's Catholicism. He doesn't really go for some alternative. He's very curious about these things. His relationship to religion and his cosmology evolves over time. But I think it's important to always think of him as a guy who's comfortable not having the answer. Right, he's fine. He'd almost prefer to not really know and sort of live in that liminal space where you can't really settle on anything. But he's also very learned, so he can talk about any of these things. This is from A Defense of the Kabbalah. If the Son is God's reconciliation with the world, the Spirit, the beginning of sanctification, according to Athanasius, an angel among others, may best be defined as God's intimacy with us. So he's saying this Holy Spirit may best be defined as God's intimacy with us, his immanence in our breast. Whether or not a mere syntactical formality, what is certain is that the third blind person of the entangled Trinity is the recognized author of the Scriptures. Gibbon, in the chapter of his work that deals with Islam, includes a certain general consensus of the publications of the Holy Spirit, modestly calculated at 100 and some. But the one which interests me now is Genesis, the subject matter of the Kabbalah, which maybe people who are more theologically adept than me had thought of this before, but I had never really thought of the Holy Spirit as being the author of the Scriptures. I really like that take, I guess.
He likes playing around with ideas of monism. The Holy Spirit wrote all the books is one version of that. Mm-hmm. He likes to say that every man who reads a line of Shakespeare is Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. Everyone is the same person in a sense. So
yeah, we have the Pierre Menard, the Quixote short story, which we might talk about.
Well, and this idea of the oneness. unity of oneness and plurality is part of the symbolism of the Aleph. It's so the gematria value of, so the Aleph is the first letter. It's the letter A essentially in Hebrew, and it's, as you know, each letter gets a numerical value, and this can be used as a way of reading things by translating words into numbers. Aleph has a double gematria value of 1 and 1,000. You can do either. This symbolically means one and many, as God is. God is one and many. And an extra Borgesian twist here is added together. They are 1,001, as in the 1,001 Nights, which is one of Borges's favorite books and tremendous influence on him. So
right. Oh, and he would have at some point he realized that, right? Made that connection, and I'm sure that delighted him to no end. Let me read just a little bit more about this from the what was it? The Defense of Kabbalah, a defense of the Kabbalah. Quote: The Kabbalists believed, as many Christians now do, in the divinity of that story, that is Genesis, in its deliberate writing by an infinite intelligence. The consequences of such an assumption are many. The careless dispatch of an ordinary text allows for a considerable amount of chance. It communicates a fact. It reports that yesterday's always unusual assault took place on such and such a street, at such and such a corner, at such and such an hour of the morning. A formula which represents no one, which limits itself to indicating such and such a place about which news was supplied. Right. So this gets he gets kind of in the weeds a little bit about the implications of all these things. There's a little bit I wanted to read. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, this is a little bit further down. Let us imagine now this astral intelligence dedicated to manifesting itself not in dynasties or annihilations or birds, but in written words. Let us also imagine, according to the pre-Augustinian theory of verbal inspiration, that God dictates word by word what he proposes to say. This premise, which was the one postulated by the Kabbalists, turns the scriptures into an absolute text where the collaboration of chance is calculated at zero. The conception alone of such a document is a greater wonder than those recorded in its pages. A book impervious to contingencies, a mechanism of infinite purposes, of infallible variations, of revelations lying in wait, of superimpositions of light. How could one not study it to absurdity, to numerical excess, as did the Kabbalah? Right. So, you can see why this guy would write something like Tlon or the Aleph or any of these stories that he's well known for. I mean, he's feeling the mystery of these things, right? He can hold that book and realize the implications of it. And for him, it's almost not even, it doesn't inspire religious faith in any way. He's fascinated by the intellectual, theological, cosmological labyrinth of it, the infinite regression of it, right? The mirrors pointing at mirrors of it. Really, really pretty interesting. Okay. Thank you for allowing me that diversion, Kevin. I see you nodding. Yes. Okay.
So, it is a labyrinth of mirrors here as we go through Borges. I'm letting it wash over me.
And
I hope the audience is as well.
Yeah. We're gonna get into some more salacious bits here in a second, because he's about to meet Nora Lang. And Nora Lang, of the many Beatrices of his life, Nora Lang is the Beatrice above Beatrice.
Lange.
Lange. Yeah. Okay. So, let me see.
She German?
Well,
she's a German surname.
I'm gonna get to it here. Okay. So, Nora she's Norwegian. Her father was Norwegian. All right. Nora was the daughter of a Norwegian man and a Argentine-born woman of Irish stock. Okay. So let me read you this description of her. Real quick. A good part of Nora's attraction lay in the exoticism of her family background. Her father, Gunnar Lang, was a Norwegian, while her mother, Berta Erfjord, though Argentine born, was herself the daughter of a Norwegian and Irish woman. The Langs were to have 5 daughters and a son, and it was to accommodate this growing brood that Gunnar Lang had bought a large detached house with an ample garden on the corners of Calle Tronador and Pampa in a barrio of the town of Belgrano. This is basically now it's within Buenos Aires. Nora, the 4th child, was born on October 23rd, 1906, and spent the first 5 years of her life in this house. But then her father, a civil engineer, was appointed to a post near the town of General Alvear in the province of Mendoza at the foot of the Andes. Now, get a little bit more description of her. She was an intelligent, well-educated. That's her mother. Sorry. Back to Nora. A particularly striking attribute of Nora Lang's was her mane of red hair, an exotic attribute in a Latin country and one associated in the Hispanic world with devilment and mischief.
He's got a type.
Yeah, he does. He definitely does.
We still haven't encountered a foot guy yet on the pod. We haven't. We're
gonna have to do
Pushkin.
Yeah, or Tarantino or something.
Okay, all right. Well, let's not do Tarantino for a while. We do have a rule. They have to be dead for a year and a day before we cover them. So
he might outlive us. Yeah.
Well, who knows? I mean, that guy.
This sign, the red hair, this sign of a fiery temperament, was borne out by her spirited behavior. Right, she grew up the tomboy of the family, notorious for her escapades and practical jokes. Her favorite turn in early adolescence was to put on a poncho and a broad-brimmed hat and climb up on the roof, from where she shocked the neighbors by shouting out a great incomprehensible stream of words in various languages, punctuating it with insults and shrieks of laughter. Okay. Eventually, she gets older, obviously.
Borges time. We do a little shrieking.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah. It's a good
little
time.
Casual shrieking.
The good thing about her is she's shrieking for fun.
Right.
Yeah. when it's not fun, yeah. Borges was, of course, extraordinarily susceptible to the romantic aura of men of action, like Nora's father, and Nora's attachment to the memory of her father undoubtedly added to her mystique. In addition, the Langs were related to the distinguished Norwegian novelist and playwright Alexander Kielland, and this meant that Nora, like Borges, could boast writers as well as heroes among her forebears. To cap it all, the two families were actually related by marriage, Nora's aunt being the wife of Borges' uncle Frank, a connection that made Nora and Georgie cousins in the Hispanic tradition. Nora's was a complex allure. Her red hair spoke of her passion, but her pale Scandinavian looks called to mind the purity of an angel, and it was this tantalizing blend of innocence and fire that she captured in dreamy poems charged with erotic anticipation. Her poems, moreover, depicted a paysage d'âme not dissimilar to Borges's, a favorite topic being the sun setting over the barrios bordering the Pampas. Small wonder that this sparkling, iridescent creature, poet, angel, temptress, and potential soulmate all in one, should have captivated the young Borges with his all too small experience of the female sex. So, meets this woman, falls madly in love with her, gives up Concepcion. She's out of the picture. That second woman he fell in love with, the first Argentine woman that he fell in love with. And Borges is not the only person obsessed with Nora. Nora becomes very rapidly the angel of the avant-garde scene. There are other people in the scene who write poetry about her, right? And it's tricky. And she's young. She's 7 years younger than Georgie. When they meet, she's 20, I want to say. She might even be younger than that. She might have been 18. And the thing with Nora and Borges is it never really works out. He pines after her. She gets friend zoned by her. She makes moves like she's getting closer to him. He tries to steal his nerve to kind of say things, and it's all futile, basically. She never really becomes his Beatrice, except in his mind. And, though she is sort of his muse from time to time, and he finds inspiration in the unrequitedness of it, right? So you're saying there's a chance. That there's a lot of energy in that. You're saying there's a chance, right?
Georgie is down bad.
He is down bad. Yeah. It takes years before this affair. It takes years before he admits that there is no chance. I think 6 years altogether from the time they meet, and they spend a lot of time together. He's going over to her house, hanging out. He's got his own tertulia, which is basically the Lang sisters and a couple other people. And when they break up, he stops writing poetry for a while. Which is interesting because it actually foments his next evolution in writing to become the Borges we know. But we're gonna sort of get there. Let's see. So, yeah. Thinking about you got, I don't know if I want to talk about politics. There's so much politics we could talk about. It's tricky for me to know how much of it's worth actually talking about. One thing to notice here, it's in as an American looking at Argentine politics, it's confusing often. You've got you've got like right wing, like how would you put it? Conservative communists. You've got, sort of like nationalists, competing factions of nationalists who think the country is something other than the other group does. It's very, and I'm sure if you grew up in that world, it makes more sense. But for me, it was a labyrinth trying to understand it, honestly.
Right.
Going from knowing nothing to like, I need to know a little bit about what's going on. It's like, I have no idea.
It seems like you would need to understand what a junta is in order to understand their politics and their history.
Yeah, juntas are quite important for sure.
Right. One interesting thing about, the world, that kind of world is that distinguishes our own is that liberalism is like understood as like a distinct faction rather than just being kind of the ambient background of politics as it is in our world.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And Borges, at this time, he would be in this sort of mid-20s period, he would be what they would refer to as a radical. And really what a radical is what we would now consider just a normal liberal person, basically. That's what it would be. He's not. I don't think any particular political opinion he had was particularly radical by our definition. Mostly just kind of a urbane, well-educated, right? Wants the economy to be good. Doesn't really trust communism, but kind of is sympathetic to some of the critiques within communism. And support for workers, support for the various kind of progressive social programs. So that's kind of his territory.
You're telling me we don't want to throw the children down the mine after they die from a hard day's, weeks, months work? No. These liberals,
these crazy
liberals, these crazy liberals want the children to unionize. They want the children to work 6 days a week, not 8.
Right. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Now by the mid to late 20s, he's finding himself a little bit stuck creatively. And we're going to get to the things that get him out of this, but I want to kind of position him where he's at. And I think what will kind of indicate where he was in 1926 is this important essay for understanding his evolution called A Profession of Literary Faith. And I think I'm going to just read, let me just read this little bit from a postulation, A Profession of Literary Faith. Quote, "My postulate is that all literature, in the end, is autobiographical. Everything is poetic that confesses, that gives us a glimpse of a destiny. In lyric poetry, this destiny usually remains immutable, alert, but always sketched by symbols that are congenial to its idiosyncrasy and allow us to follow its trace. There is no other meaning in Gongora's tresses of hair, sapphires and shattered glass, or Almafuerte's marshes and packs of dogs. The same is true for novels. The character who matters in the didactic novel El Criticon, I don't know that book, is neither Critillo nor Adrenio, nor the allegorical chorus that encircles them. It is Friar Gratian with his Lilliputian genius, his solemn puns, his bows to archbishops and grandees, his religion of distrust, his sense of excess erudition, his honeyed veneer and deep-rooted bile. Similarly, we politely suspend our disbelief of Shakespeare's age-old stories, infused with his magnificent verbiage. The one in whom we truly believe is not Lear's daughter, but the dramatist himself. Let it be clear that I do not pretend to invalidate the vitality of the theater and novels. I am asserting what Macedonio Fernandez has already said, that our craving for souls, destinies, idiosyncrasies knows full well what it covets, that if fantasy lives do not suffice, the author delves amorously into his own. The same applies to metaphors. Any metaphor, as beguiling as it may be, is a possible experience, and the difficulty lies not in its invention, a simple thing attained by the mere shuffling of fancy words, but in achieving it in a way that astonishes the reader. Okay, a little further down the page. The variety of words is another error. All the academicians, okay, recommend it, I think, mistakenly. I
Nailed it.
Words,
first try. Got
boom.
it. Boom.
I believe words must be conquered, lived, and that the apparent publicity they receive from the dictionary is a falsehood. Nobody should dare to write the word outskirts without having spent hours pacing their high sidewalks, without having desired and suffered as if they were a lover, without having felt their walls, their lots, their moons just around the corner from a general store like a cornucopia. I have now conquered my poverty, recognizing among thousands the 9 or 10 words that get along with my soul. I have already written more than one book in order to write perhaps one page. That page justifies me. That summarizes my destiny, the one that perhaps only the attending angels will hear when judgment day arrives. Simply, the page that, at dusk, upon the resolved truth of day's end, at sunset, with its dark and fresh breeze and girls glowing in the streets, I would dare to read to a friend. So, again, we're getting this like intense passion about literature in this case, about the word, the individual word in this case, the individual page. But he's also talking a lot about this confessionalism aspect, all writing his autobiography. Later on in his life, when he's giving lectures at Harvard, he basically says, oh, when I write a story, I just try to forget myself entirely. So I don't know how true the second statement was necessarily, and I don't know how earnest this statement is, or if this is him idealizing, trying to reach for this kind of thing. But all this stuff is sort of in there, because I think a lot of his stories, if you don't know anything about Borges, don't seem autobiographical at all, other than he puts his name in there. They don't feel like they're confessing to anything. But there are correspondences that, knowing his biography, you can start to see.
Well, it's really interesting. Another early essay of his is called The Nothingness of Personality, in which he tries to disprove the idea that there's any kind of coherent whole self.
Yeah.
And then, around the same time, he's also saying that, well, all literature is autobiographical, and it makes you wonder, the autobiography of what if there is no self? And that's kind of, this is the paradox of Borges. And if you kind of try to put those two together, you get this, thing where all the writing, all of Borges is about Borges, but Borges isn't anything other than all of this writing. I want to read a short, relevant quote that he wrote this in the afterword to a collection called The Maker, which is kind of a cool collection because it's pieces that are very, very short, sometimes a paragraph. But anyways, he wrote, "A man sets out to draw the world. As the years go by, he peoples a space with images of provinces, kingdoms, mountains, bays, ships, islands, fishes, rooms, instruments, stars, horses, and individuals. A short time before he dies, he discovers that the patient labyrinth of lines traces the lineaments of his own face." So the whole time, it's like he's writing an autobiography, or he's producing himself sort of through his writing. And what is the image of his own face is what he has created in the process of doing that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's something that, like, talking about like autobiographical, like to him, writing the autobiographical does not mean to write the events that happened to you. It is something more like creating this thing that ends up being your face. Yeah, that's a beautiful passage. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, because there is very little, all this stuff about Nora and stuff. None of this ends up. Some of it shows up in the poetry a little bit, and some of it does show up in the fiction, sort of traces of it. But you wouldn't read it and necessarily go, "Oh, Borges had quite a time with this Nora Lang woman," right? It's not a Nausgard or whatever, right? Okay, so let's see. So Nora Lang, kind of tricky. Okay, we got to talk about how he loses Nora. There's an event which encapsulates. I felt this is maybe the worst I've felt for Borges in the entire
Is it
story.
fair to say here Borges has no chill?
He's got no
No
chill.
chill, no chill.
He's got no game either. Like no
Okay.
swagger whatsoever. And
You can get by if you have game but no chill. You can
Yeah.
get by if you have chill but no game. But if
Yeah,
you have
but
no game and no chill,
I mean, what are you
you're
gonna
in
do?
serious trouble.
Yeah, right.
You better hit the gym. You got to do 2 a days then. Yeah. You're not even going to have time to date.
Yeah. And the problem is you don't even need that much. You just need some at a particular moment, right?
A little bit of chill.
Yeah, and Borges basically never has any of it. Okay, so 1926, Argentina. At this time, Nora seems to like him. There is a drunken party to celebrate the relaunch of this journal called Martin Fierro. Martin Fierro is an important name to understand in Argentine cultural and just general history. It's a gaucho novel, and it's constantly reinterpreted throughout, even till now, probably. Borges would rewrite the ending of Martin Fierro in a story called The End. And it's constantly being like leveraged by different political parties, and like how you interpret it, define it at certain points. How you interpret the story Martin Fierro determines like what side of the political fence you're on, and specific issues. It's a critical. I don't even think we necessarily have an equivalent to this book in America, and maybe we do, and I just don't see it. But it's almost like an Aleph of Argentina. Like you look into it, and depending on what you see, that's what you think Argentina should be, right?
In our country, we're always debating about what the great American novel actually is.
Yeah.
In Argentina, that's not a question. It's Martin Fierro.
Very well put. Yes. Yeah. And the liberals and the conservatives would agree, right? They wouldn't disagree. They would interpret the book differently, slightly. Yeah. Okay. So this journal gets relaunched. Borges is involved in that. And he's kind of in the scene, right? He's sort of started the Buenos Aires avant-garde movement in a way, or at least was there at its birth. And then on November 6th, 1926, Nora, who primarily people knew he and Borges and Nora were kind of together. She was a bit on the scene, but this is the first time where they go to something together, like kind of as a couple. And they go to this luncheon party at the boating lake in Palermo Park. It's a party that's held in honor of a new gaucho novel that's come out called Don Segundo Sombra. And after the party, Nora's heart will belong to another man. And I'm going to read a little bit about that.
Nora, dance with the one who brung ya.
Yeah, for real.
Oh.
At the time of the party in honor of Ricardo Giraldes, that's this party I'm talking about, Nora Lang was known as a published poet and a literary protege of Borges, but her contact with other members of the new generation outside Borges' own circle had been very limited. Moving down, Borges introduced Nora to Oliverio Garando, and she was later to find herself sitting next to her new acquaintance over lunch. What struck her about Garando was his voice. It was dark and resonant like mahogany or something underground, as she would say. At one point, she knocked over a bottle of wine, whereupon Garando leaned over toward her and said, "Blood will flow between us." It was a remark that could scarcely have been better judged to impress a 20-year-old girl like Nora, who was so susceptible to the advent of a man to whom she felt destined to give herself. After lunch, they danced together, and then Garando took her home. Nora had fallen head over heels for this stranger. Oliveiro was vital, passionate. I was in love with him from that day on. So, yeah. So
got mogged.
Borges loses. Yeah. Totally.
Ouch.
And here's part of the other problem. Borges didn't like Garando before all of this. Like before this, he was already like despised him. They'd argued over like the direction of the avant-garde, right? They would have written different manifestos if they were writing manifestos.
Brutal.
There was sort of class resentment because Garando was from the actual ruling class. Borges was from an old family of the upper middle class, but they didn't have any influence. But Grando is from like a ruling class.
It's very similar to our dynamic, Brad.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know which one's which. It would be
our descendants will be podcast nobility.
Oh, I see. I see what you're
saying.
Think
about this. Yes, it's very good. Aldous as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes,
that's right. Yeah. So podcast nobility. Okay. So after
the House of Asterion will be known about throughout the land.
That's right. That's right. Okay, I just have to think about that for a second. Okay. Grando steals Borges's girl. And again, like we said, this goes on for it's years before Borges is over this. Part of the reason he has a difficulty getting over this is because while Grando sort of steals her, Grando never commits to her. Grando doesn't just like marry her and that's it. It's like, oh, he's off in Europe and he's like, well, I don't know if I can marry you. And like he's wishy-washy, so she's unstable, right?
Catnip. This guy this is the PUA. He's doing it. He's got all the game.
Game and chill.
Game and chill. He has both of these things for sure. And he would become notorious later for having crazy parties too. And every time sort of Grando isn't on the scene, Borges tries to slip in there. But Borges, if you're going to try and slip in there, you got to have some game. Borges has no game. So, his kind of thing would be to just like come up and just be like, Nora, I'll die if you're not with me, like that sort of thing. Right. And it's just not, it just doesn't work usually. Okay. But there's, she's young and she, it's just tricky to say. She probably liked the attention somewhat. She was in the same scene and it's not that big of a scene, right? How many avant-garde poets are there in Buenos Aires? It's in the order of dozens, right? It's not like it's that big of a world.
One can hope.
Yeah. Now here is the culminating mortification of this entire process. Okay. Nora at one point goes to Oslo to stay with some family there. And Borges, this is like when she leaves, Borges is under the impression that when she comes back, they might be together. But he's writing her letters and she's not answering them. So he's, forlorn and all this. After she comes back, she writes a novel that is very thinly fictionalized version of basically her life. It had an other title, but it would eventually, when it came out, it would basically be called 45 Days and 30 Sailors. And it's about her time on the boat to Oslo. Very sexually suggestive, very suggestive of like sexual exploration, never really quite stating it, right?
Reading my search history.
Yeah, right. 45 Days and 30 Sailors.
30 Sailors.
Yeah.
See.
Yeah.
Ooh.
At the release party, all the homies in the avant-garde scene, including Pablo Neruda, who's sort of lurking around and who she may have had a romantic thing with, they all dressed up as sailors and she dressed up as a mermaid at the release party, right? And then Borges did not go to the party, but he wrote a review of the novel in which he is a character and is sort of shunted off to the side. And it's sort of like, this is the thing, he's not like, he just puts himself in the position to suffer.
He's a
from
simp.
it. Yeah, right. Yeah, yep. Exactly. And it's just like, dude, you just
never simp.
No, you gotta, give it some time. Try to get in there, and if at some point all signs point to no, you just move on, man.
2 a days at the gym.
Yeah,
that's what you do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, he really never. And here's the thing: he has other romances, but he never really gets over Nora. He refers to her in a story he publishes in 1970. It makes a clear reference to Nora. And let me read a quick thing from the bio. This is years and years later. Remember, she basically broke up with him in 1926. This thing, hold on, let me get to it. In The Duel, which is written in the 1960s, Borges went as far as he could toward unmasking the autobiographical origins of the theme without actually giving away the true identities of the rivals. The story describes the secret enmity between Clara Glencairn, an abstract painter, and Marta Pizarro, who started painting portraits of Argentine heroes and then went on to specialize in old houses of Buenos Aires. Borges was, of course, alluding to his old feud with Garando, but disguised it by making the rivals women and their medium painting instead of poetry. Like Nora Lang, Glencarn was haughty and tall and had fiery red hair. Her first exhibition was held at an avant-garde gallery on Calle Supacha, which was the street where Grando lived. Marta Pizarro's nativist paintings called to mind Borges's Creolissimo of the 1920s. On the surface, the relations were amicable, even generous. When Clara won a prize, Marta organized a dinner in her honor, and in her speech of thanks, Clara observed that there existed no opposition between tradition and innovation, between order and adventure. So there's more to that story, but the point is 40 years go by and he's still processing this rivalry, this breakup and all of that, right? He
gotta let it go, man.
Yeah, he goes so far. He goes so far as in 1940, he tries to basically get with Nora's sister Haiti. So yeah, believes he's in love with her, etc.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Okay.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
That's
the echo of the earlier moment, the idealization. Not good.
No. Okay, so at the time of his peak with this relationship, so this is the thing. Now, on the other side of when what was the way to put this? He has this rejection by Nora. It's devastating. He stops writing poetry. Once he's able to kind of get through to the other side, he never gets over it. But once the wounds heal to some degree is when we get the Borges that everybody has read, right? That's when it all starts. So I'm kind of curious like how he gets there, right? I think, maybe, looking at time here, maybe we can talk about, I know, Aldous, you wanted to talk about on exactitude in science. And I think that's a good example of the Borges. If you don't know much about Borges, these couple of stories we've talked about. On exactitude in science is almost the pure crystal of that.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a later story. It comes from that collection I mentioned called The Maker, where they're all like really short like this. But it's short enough that I can read the entirety of it, which is really cool.
Let's do it. Yeah.
So here we go. In that, sorry, start again, back up.
Yeah.
Ooh, swing and a miss. In that empire, the art of cartography attained such perfection that the map of a single province occupied the entirety of a city, and the map of the empire, the entirety of a province. In time, those unconscionable maps no longer satisfied, and the cartographers' guilds struck a map of the empire, whose size was that of the empire, and which coincided point for point with it. The following generations, who were not so fond of the study of cartography as their forebears had been, saw that the vast map was useless, and not without some pitilessness was it that they delivered it up to the inclemencies of sun and winters. In the deserts of the West, still today, there are tattered ruins of that map, inhabited by animals and beggars. In all that land, there is no other relic of the disciplines of geography. That's it.
Yeah, that's
the full story.
I love that.
I think of Borges as not a minimalist, but a miniaturist. You can see that his sentences are not like terse or minimal in the way that a Hemingway is. They could be rather prolix, in fact. But the scale of his form is really small, such that he's trying to convey big ideas. He's trying to fit infinity in a nutshell. In fact, that's the idea of the Aleph, is that everything is in this tiny little point in space, and he's trying to execute that formally in a way where if he can convey, in fact, this is what he says famously in the introduction to Ficciones, that why spend time writing these vast labyrinthine novels when one could suggest them, when one can assume that they exist and then just write a synopsis of them, which is what he does in several stories there. But this story has like there's something of a fable-like or almost fairy tale-like quality to it. And like you said, it's been very influential.
Yeah, it feels allegorical. But it does the thing that my favorite of Kafka's writing does, where it feels allegorical. I still can't quite articulate this, I don't think. It feels allegorical, but the allegory never quite lands. It's like,
Yeah.
so what are the maps? I keep trying to think, well, okay, does he mean that's history? But then for some reason, like that analogy doesn't quite work. And so what you're left with is just this sort of, like, I feel like I still don't understand on exactitude and science exactly. I just know how it makes me feel. And it's
Yeah.
very interesting for a story that has no characters to instill in me such a profound and idiosyncratic emotional state.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's almost, to me, is sort of miraculous about some of Borges's work, is it makes me feel like nothing else I've ever read feels.
Yeah, definitely. I do think that Kafka is probably a good precursor here. If he got that kind of heterogeneous list from Whitman, he probably got this more like fragmentary or minimal approach from Kafka.
And the fable quality too. I mean, a lot of Kafka's work has a very fable-like aspect to it.
Kafka
not the novels, but
would do things like rewriting the myth of Prometheus and stuff like that. Now this is a place where Borges starts to influence postmodern philosophy and not just fiction. If you've ever read the philosopher Jean Baudrillard, he begins Simulacra and Simulation, probably his most famous book, by discussing this story, only to reject it because he says that this is precisely what his idea of the simulacra isn't, which is this copy that becomes so detailed that it actually just reproduces reality entirely. He says that the relations have become reversed. It's actually in our world, Baudrillard says it's the empire that's decaying in the desert, not the map.
Right. The empire is decaying and we're living in the map.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or there just is no, there's no map, there's no territory. It's all simulated. But anyway, with that, guys, I gotta head out. Thanks for having me on. I have to put the little Asterion to bed now.
Of course. It was a real honor, man. We really appreciate you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, future guys. Podcast royalty. Going to bed right now. Thank you, Aldous.
All right.
Good. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon, man.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Take care. Good guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Couldn't it? Yeah. And he brought the heat on some of this stuff that I don't quite get my head around. So, okay. So we're making progress here, Kevin.
You're doing a fabulous job, Brad. And I just have to say, for everybody listening, we got a couple of juicy things coming for you on the After Dark. Patreon.com/artofdarkpod.
Yeah.
We did a core episode on Maryland yesterday. There's an After Dark for that. We're doing the core episode right now. There's going to be an After Dark for this, Brad. We're going to talk about the Nobel Prize.
We're going to talk about why he didn't win the Nobel Prize. Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about this rather obscure language in Switzerland, just for kicks.
I love it. I love it. Part of our explanation for why he didn't win the Nobel Prize, we're also going to explain what a junta is. It's involved. It's important. It's necessary. You can't explain why Borges lost the Nobel Prize without knowing what a junta is.
Scudahunta. Got to listen to the Maryland episode for that.
To catch that joke.
Lots of through lines and jokes and different things happening here on Art of Darkness. We do love covering these individual subjects, but we like to add a little bit of a little spice.
Yeah,
sauce.
For sure. Absolutely. Okay, so what we're sort of talking about the thing I said, Nora, he loses Nora. He stops writing poetry, and yet when he does manage to get himself somehow to the other side of this Nora heartbreak, he becomes the Borges we know. And how does this happen? I was very interested in this transformation. You go from a guy who's clearly brilliant, but writing poetry the poetry itself isn't formally innovative particularly. And the essays, though some of them are quite interesting, a lot of them are fairly stock book reviews. How does he get to become this other guy? And there's a bunch of factors. There's one little thing that I want to read from the biography. The true quote, the true legacy of his father was an intellectual anarchism that drove him to assert the uniqueness of the self against any force that threatened to constrain or negate it. It was this will to freedom that made Borges so combative and polemical throughout his career, and so ambitious, for there was nothing he liked better, with the exception of writing and reading, than to be the leader of a literary faction involved in some embattled cause or other. So we have to think about him like that, too. Can't stand up to his mother, but he will stand down the entire avant-garde literary movement, right?
He's the kind of guy that loves a pamphlet.
He does love
seen
pamphlets.
The pamphlet?
Yes.
No,
yes.
not last week's pamphlet. Yesterday's
that
pamphlet.
manifesto is completely outdated. Yeah, I read another. Yeah.
Did you get the memo?
Yeah, right. Another thing is another factor that's in the evolution of Borges is a little bit more political. This is his political involvement with this guy Irigoyen. In 1928. Hipólito Yrigoyen, who'd first been president in 1916 under the first secret and mandatory vote for men, thus was the first democratically elected president of Argentina, if you think that's possible without the vote of women, right? He won on a platform of liberal nationalism in the Radical Civic Union Party. Radical Civic Union Party, this was basically the party that Borges was a part of. Irigoyen had he was convinced that the country had to manage its own currency, it had to manage its own transportation, energy, petroleum, etc. He tried to limit the ability of foreign businesses to operate in Argentina, and he generally oversaw the beginnings of an impressive economic expansion. He was ousted in 1922, but now in 1928, he was being ushered back in, and Borges was a huge booster. So Borges was a publicly recognized figure. You might know him more at that time, for his Irigoyen boostering than you did for his writing, right? Here's kind of another thing. We see Borges starting to coming up with the literature that would define magic realism or magical realism. Now, magical realism has become something that now is almost parodic or a little bit looked down upon. And that's just like any sort of genre innovation. It sort of starts to crumble and fall apart after a while without rejuvenating. It becomes a little farcical after a while, right?
It becomes a parody of itself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But when sort of at the beginning of this, where Borges's first collection of short stories has been called the first book of magical realism, it's a little bit different, right? It's if you're the first one who did something, it's different. The first disco album was a whole different thing than the last disco album, right? But here's
the last disco album is Random Access Memories by Daft Punk, and that's why they're the greatest of all time. That's why that's okay. Okay, good. All right. Let's not argue about.
I hadn't really thought through this analogy.
No, that's okay. But you're right. You're right. Yeah, that last sad disco 8-track in 1985.
Yeah, where it's like, we don't make disco anymore, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now here I think you can see the evolution of his thought from 1929 to 1936. This is a key period in his overall evolution. It's post Nora Lang, right? Just in the titles of his essays during this time, the prominent essays that show up in the collected nonfiction. And I'm just going to read the titles of them because I literally think you can get this. You can track what I'm trying to explain. One essay is called "The Perpetual Race of Achilles and the Tortoise." There's an essay called "The Duration of Hell," "The Superstitious Ethics of the Reader," "The Postulation of Reality," "A Defense of Basilides the False," "The Homeric Versions," which I think we alluded to, "Narrative of Art and Magic," "A Defense of the Kabbalah," which we talked about, "The Art of Verbal Abuse," "The Translators of the 1001 Nights," "The Labyrinths of the Detective Story and Chesterton." That one's really good. "The Doctrine of Cycles." And finally, one called "A History of Eternity." Now, "A History of Eternity," that is, if you wanted to have like a random generation of Borges stories. History of eternity is a perfect little keyword, right? Yeah, it has that trick to it, that would be the kind of thing that he would love. I really like, all these essays are probably worth reading to some extent. I didn't read all of them. Some of them I had read in the past, some of them I reread. A couple others were new. One of particular interest is narrative art and magic. He basically lays out this sort of, it comes off in a very like mild-mannered kind of way, but he's basically telling you how to get magic into your novel, which I think is pretty interesting. He summarizes it. He says the way that you have to think about it to make your novel magical, right, is that every lucid and determined detail is a prophecy. So the things that happen in the book are actually prophetic of what's going to happen later. That's the perspective that you sort of need to maintain. Just pretty interesting. He looks at a handful of books in this essay, including Edgar Allan Poe's narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, which I'm going to read that book this year. I've determined. It keeps coming up. Borges also was an avid reader of detective novels and adventure novels and fantasy. He's trying to sort of, after reading all this, he's sort of trying to come up with the rules, maybe for himself as much as for an audience. There's a little bit I want to read here on this. Okay, and I think you'll dig this, Kevin. Quote, later that year, he wrote The Art of Narrative and Magic. This is the essay I was just talking about, in which he questioned the premises of literary realism. His basic contention was that fiction did not depend on the illusion of reality. What mattered ultimately was an author's ability to generate, quote, poetic faith in his reader. Naturalistic description, he argued, was not especially effective in making a reader suspend disbelief. A writer could employ techniques of indirection and suggestion to render fabulous creatures like centaurs and sirens aesthetically convincing. The fundamental problem of the novel, Borges asserted, was causality. The realist novel, the quote slow-moving novel of character, presented a concatenation of motives purporting to be no different from that which exists in the real world. But in novels of adventure and short stories, in the infinite spectacular novel which is Hollywood, another order reigned, the primitive clarity of magic. Indeed, magic, he contended, offered the best analogy for the way in which narrative actually worked. Magical causality operated by virtue of a general law of sympathy that postulated an inevitable link between distant objects, a necessary connection not just between a corpse and a bullet, but between a corpse and a mutilated wax effigy, or a broken mirror, or spilled salt, or 13 people at a dinner table. Narrative fashioned a comparable teleology of words and episodes, a precise interplay of observations, echoes, and affinities. Fiction did not hold up a mirror to reality. Rather, it constituted an autonomous sphere of corroborations, omens, and monuments that was best illustrated by Joyce's Ulysses. So, his approach, his philosophy on all this stuff, it went from earlier on, it's all about Whitman-esque transcendence and confession and autobiography, to whoa, it's actually magic. I mean, if I'm going to boil it down as simple as possible,
I will co-sign.
Yes,
as a writer for a number of years, that tracks the clearest with my experience of what it is both as a practice and then also as a realization.
Right. Yeah, agreed. No, when he said that, yeah, I'm on board with Borges here. Another thing going on here that's propelling him to the Borges we know, is his fascination with crime and the underworld. Right, fascinated with knife fighters, fascinated with the gaucho myth. In the 1930s, he becomes friends with this guy Don Nicholas Paredes, who is a former godfather of the Palermo underworld and a legendary knife fighter. One of Borges's first stories was called Men of the Outskirts, was basically about this guy, was about this legendary knife fighter. It's about brothels and duels and all of this. Generally, it's just important to remember that this world always appeals to him. And while we talk about the Library of Babel and Tlan, there's also a bunch of stories that are set in the criminal underworld too, that are almost noirs, but weird. They always have a weird. There's always an aura, a strange alienating aura to them that doesn't maybe exist in something like Raymond Chandler or whatever. Oh, at one point he sees this is very inspirational to him, actually. At one point he sees a murder. He's in I think it's Paraguay, visiting somebody, and they're in a bar, and some gaucho comes up and just kills a guy right next to Borges and then just walks away. And then the next day they're in the bar again, and the same guy is in there. And he was just fascinated by the ability, sort of conscience and physically, all of it, the ability for this guy to just come in, murder somebody in full view of everyone, walk out, and then the next day come back. That was just mind-blowing to him.
That is remarkable. Yeah, that is something to think about. Yeah, Borges doesn't seem like a man of action.
He's not.
He's almost pure thought.
Right. And I think, you can always understand, though, like a person who is completely cerebral, there's always going to be a little bit of appeal to that man of action thing, right? And I think for a lot of men of action, there's probably a little bit of appeal of the intellectual too, right? Like, if I had read more, there's always a little bit of a grass is always greener, and he certainly always wished he was more of a man of action. Okay, so there's another thing that kind of goes on here too. 1938, his father died. And here's another thing too. From 1926 basically until the publication of Ficciones, his reputation, he was pretty well known in the literary avant-garde. He's publishing a lot of stuff in magazines and journals that have decent distribution, but his star as a literary figure is sort of falling into, like, nobody's reading his original work. They're reading his essays, they're reading his reviews, they're reading his political statements. And so his reputation is, people still know who he is, but you don't think of him even as a poet anymore if you're in Buenos Aires. He's a public intellectual kind of guy, right? Which is just interesting. So everybody knows him, but he still hasn't done the thing that he's going to be, most well known for. 1938, his father dies. His father had been blind for years at this point. Surgeries hadn't worked, etc. He was 64 years old, and he'd become entirely dependent on Borges' mother. Now that he was gone, his mother had more bandwidth to sort of put herself into Borges's life, right? Which is not necessarily a good thing. Soon, Borges is going blind himself slowly, starting in 1928. Soon he'd be entirely dependent on her for everything. She was his assistant, right? And we'll get a little bit more into that. Let's talk about his eyes briefly. He'd always had bad eyes, myopia. March of 1928, he had the first of 8 different surgeries that he would endure, most of them on his cataracts, before going effectively blind in 1953 at the age of 54 years old. He'd lived another 30 some years after that.
That's tragic. I didn't know that happened.
Yeah. You can tell in photos of him as an older man, like he's clearly not looking at the camera or knowing where a camera is or anything. And it's interesting. He could see, there was, I think, the color yellow. He managed to keep the color yellow, but mostly it was just very vague shapes. And there's a story when he's older of, he wanted to go to the ocean near in England someplace. I don't remember exactly where. He wanted to go out to see the ocean, and he wanted to have a moment alone with the ocean, which is a very poetic moment, right?
What's fun about wanting to go to the ocean when you're in England is if you just walk in any direction, eventually you end up there.
That's right. That's right. So he could have just done. He didn't need anybody to take him.
It's only an island if you look at it from the water.
Right.
The ubiquitous Jaws line. I think that's the line. Anyway, go on. Yes, go on. Yeah.
So anyway, this later story, and it's just this touching moment where his friend takes him to the beach or whatever, and he's going to leave him alone. He's going to leave Borges alone. But his friend goes off in a distance, but watches him because Borges is blind, right? So you don't want to make sure your buddy doesn't get in any trouble. And he notices that Borges is pointed in the wrong direction. And so he has to go back and say, no, the ocean's over here. And then walk away again. And there's just something very touching about that to me, and how difficult it must be to be blind. Just you can't. Anyway,
I also think that there's something to be said about being born with blindness and then also emerging into it. I think. Right. But it is fascinating. He has the kind of mind that I imagine he put himself to learning Braille, and
he never really learned Braille.
Okay, so how was he able to read? I suppose you'll tell me.
He would have friends read for him. He would have people come read to him and for him. And now when he finally went fully blind, he was famous. And we're going to get more to this. Like he was everybody knew who Borges was. And so he'd have people come and read to him, but his writing process was fascinating. So when he was fully blind in the 50s of 1953 and after, his writing would be to just sit there and just go over it in his mind over and over and over and over until he got it just right. And then he would dictate it to somebody once he had memorized it and had it exactly what he wanted in his head. Just a fascinating approach. And what you'd have to, you got to do something. You can't write anything down in a way that's meaningful to you, right? So, there's something else that happens in 1938 that is of significance, and this is that he has basically a mystical experience, and I'll just read the description of it, because there's some details in here that I want to make sure we get. Okay. Christmas Eve, 1938. Borges had gone to fetch a girl at her apartment, some 5 blocks from where he lived, in order to accompany her home for dinner with his mother. The elevator was out of order, so he decided to run up the stairs, but in the poor light, he knocked his head against a newly painted casement window that had been left open to dry. Despite receiving first aid, the wound became poisoned, and for a week he lay in bed with a high fever and suffering from insomnia and hallucinations. One evening, he lost his power of speech and had to be rushed to the hospital for an emergency operation in the middle of the night. He had developed septicemia, and for a month he hovered between life and death. When he recovered, he feared he might have been left mentally impaired and might never write again. He decided to write something he had never done before so that he would not feel so bad if he failed, and this led him to write Pierre Menard, author of Don Quixote, while he was convalescing from his illness in the summer months between January and April 1939. Now, Pierre Menard is one of the first 2 or 3 stories he wrote in the great collection we're going to read in the Bookends Reading Club. It's a story about a guy who decides he wants to rewrite Don Quixote, and not just write it by transcribing it. He wants to have the full experience of embodying Miguel Cervantes and then writing it, right? It's a very fascinating read. Yeah, It's very, very interesting. And it gained a lot of attention when it came out. There's nothing quite like it up to that point. It has literary comparisons of passages from the original Cervantes Quixote and then the new one by Pierre Menard, and the words are exactly the same, but the interpretation of them is totally different. There's some cool little tricks he's pulling in there, and it's a precursor to a lot of this other stuff he's going to do eventually. Okay. Something else happens in let's see. Okay, so I think I'll just read this part too, because this is a big deal. Borges starts to get his first, he had some jobs working for magazines, but this is probably his first real job. It was very likely his father's plight that jolted Borges into seeking a full-time job for the first time in his life. And I just said that. He was 38 and had no educational qualifications whatsoever, not even the Swiss baccalaureate. When he was in school in Geneva, he didn't graduate. He now found that the best he could manage by way of earning an independent living was a post as a library assistant in the municipal library service. He becomes a librarian. His salary was a measly 210 pesos a month, though sometime later, through the influence of friends, it was raised to 240 pesos, a miserable wage all the same. On his first day at the library, he was surprised to find that there were some 50 of us doing what 15 could easily have done. He was put to work as a cataloger and soon discovered that the library's holdings were so meager that cataloging was unnecessary. He set about doing an honest job of it anyway, but the following day he was taken aside by his colleagues and rebuked for working too hard. The cataloging
Hey,
job...
see, we got a sweet deal here. Come on, man.
Exactly. The cataloging job had been planned to give them some semblance of work, so he must ration the number of books he classified each day, or they would all be out of a job. So he wrote. He went to work, worked for an hour or two a day, and then he wrote and read. It's perfect.
Jeff, because I love it. Perfect.
Yeah.
He has found himself where he belongs.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You wish the salary was more, but I mean, hey, if you're working an hour or two a day and then you're able to write.
Yeah. Hey, man,
he's getting it in.
And he could sell some of his writings too. It's not, he wasn't a nobody, right? Like his work would get published in journals and things.
Right. So, and this is back before that was entirely worthless. You know, like this is when like you could sell a short story and put a down payment on for a house.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So now we're into the early 1940s. Nothing is happening in the world in the 1940s, of course. That's sort of my joke every time World War II comes up. Borges hated the Austrian corporal as much as anybody.
Sure.
He called for the Austrian corporal's annihilation in the journal called Sur. The journal Sur was a big deal in Buenos Aires at the time. And Borges' allegiance to something called the SADE, which was the Argentine Society of Writers. This is the long-standing writer society in Argentina, made a decisively anti-Hitler turn. And Borges went along for the ride with this, right? He just thrust him back into the public scene in a way his influence had been waning. This movement, the SADE, and its very anti-Hitler turn would kind of spawn a pro-Axis nationalist movement that assembled a writers' union of its own. So now you've got two writers' unions sort of competing for supremacy fundamentally over one side's on the Allies side and one side's on the Axis side of World War II, right? So World War II is happening in Europe, but it's also happening in like the Palermo neighborhood of Buenos Aires in a way, right?
But geographically, they're tucked away on the other side of South America. Mm-hmm. Obviously, everybody has to have an opinion about it, but they are fortunate in that sense. And of course, later the Austrian corporal would relocate with his entire cabinet to Argentina. I saw that on YouTube.
Where they remain to this day, I believe.
That's what I've heard. Yeah, there are tunnels to Agartha down there somewhere. Please, if you feel differently, be sure to get at me at Art of Dark Pod on Twitter.
Hey.
Oh, that's Brad. But you can tell Brad about the tunnels and the Antarctic base and all the rest of it.
If you got a good link, send it my way.
Right, but this is before they relocated to Argentina.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. So he's back in the public scene. He's part of this SADE, which is like being part of like the National Writers Guild or whatever, and it's one of its most prominent members at this point. 1941, he puts out The Garden of Forking Paths, which is the first half of fictions. Combine it with artifices, and you have the book that came out called Ficciones, or Fictions in English. The part of the issue here, it's worth noting, he puts out this book, groundbreaking work. I mean, this is where the Library of Babel comes from, the story Garden of Forking Paths. This is where Tlon comes from, the Pierre Menard story. Absolutely groundbreaking, exquisitely crafted work. It wins none of the national awards because the damn nationalist totalitarians are in charge, right? And what,
don't like that.
What is political? What's more politicized than literary awards?
A PTA meeting?
Right.
There's probably less bias at a PTA meeting than there is in a room judging who to give a certain prize to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oof.
Okay, let me read this bit. This clearly was a time of reckoning for Argentina, and Borges would rise to the occasion by challenging the growing totalitarianism of the regime in the cause of cultural freedom. In the latter part of 1944, he decided to publish a collection of the 6 new stories he had written since The Garden of Forking Paths. The title he chose for his new book was Artificios, which was in keeping with his belief that fiction constituted an artificial orba autonomo. But it was also a title that asserted his right to be as politically disengaged and cosmopolitan as he pleased. The scandal over his failure to win a national award for literature 2 years earlier had made Borges one of the most prominent of the regime's intellectual opponents. And his friends in the SUR group and at SADE were alive to the possibility of exploiting artifices for political ends. It was the communist writer Enrique Amorim who came up with the idea that would maximize the political capital that could be made from the publication of Borges' stories. He proposed that SADE create a prize of its own and award it to Borges. The latter seemed to have been quite happy to go along with this maneuver, and it may well have been Amorim's proposal that influenced his decision to reissue The Garden of Forking Paths, the object of the earlier controversy, under the same cover as Artificios, in order, as it were, to add fuel to the fire. This double collection then was called Ficciones, an unpolitical a title as Artificios, and one that, under the circumstances, would make the likes of Hugo Vlast, some guy, doesn't matter, see red. The book came out on December 4th, 1944, and several months later, it duly received the Gran Premio de Honor that had been specially created for it by the SADE. So that book feels unpolitical completely when you read it. And yet it was used as a political weapon, basically, to essentially, remember when we found out that the CIA was paying for abstract expressionist modern art?
Yep.
Do you remember?
I do remember that.
Right. So we could point out to the Russians how free we were.
Nothing like that happens now.
That's what happened.
It's all pure.
That's what happened with Ficciones. It was used as a
fascinating.
It doesn't make it a bad book.
I hope you're taking notes out there, because if you've got deep pockets, first you got to get over to patreon.com/artofdarkpod. You got to email us artofdarkpod@gmail.com. Throw money at us at your podcast nobility. You have to. We're fallen nobles at this point. But all of that said, like you can put together a $50,000 writing prize and a committee of, let's say, like-minded people. You can do this. Nothing's stopping you from doing this right now. And this can have an outsized influence on the culture.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about Ficciones right now.
Stop.
I didn't even know any
about
of this
it.
Stuff. Yeah.
Start getting the funds together to support artists with direct material rewards.
Yeah, this is funny. There's on Twitter and things. There's I don't know, somebody there's a frequent thing of like posting some fresco from the Renaissance, being like, why doesn't anybody paint like this anymore? And the answer is because nobody will pay for it. That's why nobody paints like that anymore.
100%. Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, did you ever remember the Medicis? It was a whole cartel whose half their purpose was to pay.
Yeah, not only will they not pay for it, but they don't assign status to the artist. The artist is considered a content creator, and it's like, no, you have to return status to the arts, a respect for it as craft, but then also, you got to pay. You got to pay,
right?
Yeah, this is America. Pay me.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, Ficciones comes out. It wins this award, and it's clear to pretty much everybody in the Argentine intellectual sphere, even I think the people who were against him politically, like, oh, Borges like really dropped something on us here. Like, it took a while to process what had happened when this book showed up. But he's getting nudged into the spotlight once again. And so things are really good for him on sort of the literary scene. And remember, he wanted to redefine or define what Argentine literature was. And now he's basically done it in a certain way. And yet he's still going blind. right? He's still heartbroken over this Nora Lang woman. He lives with his mother now, whom he loves, but who basically controls his life. He was never able to stand up to her. And this defined his inability to sort of stand up and act more broadly, right? It's not perfect. He didn't win everything, right? Nonetheless,
That's a very tough row to hoe. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, for sure. Nevertheless, he moves forward in the next round of stories, writes the Aleph, which we mentioned the title, the title story from, but it has a number of other great stories in it. Starts trying to write a longer work that he referred to as a novel, but when it came out in the 1970s, it was only 40 pages, called The Congress. Just interesting. Never wrote anything very long. It's the longest thing he ever wrote. It's like 40 pages. And yet, he does meet some other women. He courts a woman who basically implies, though she might have been joking, that he had to have sex with her before they would get married. He asked her to marry him, and she basically said yes, but we have to have sex first. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't bring himself to doing it.
What was that? Some sort of moral guilt, or
no? I think he just couldn't. I think he's afraid. I think he was afraid to act. I think he was nervous. I think he was anxious, according to Edwin Williamson, anyway.
That was the one thing that wasn't in his Aleph.
Yeah, right. It wasn't in there. Yeah. Yeah. And it, other than it's hard to say. It's not even clear from the biography. It's not even 100% clear that Borges ever had sex. Now, he does refer, the last poem when Nora broke up with him, the last poem he wrote for 14 years had something about prostitution is heaven for people who live in hell, which seemed to imply that he might have been visiting prostitutes. But there's no clear person that he ever had sex with. That's suggested, kind of. He has this other woman he dated, but again, his mother always hated the women he dated, and he just went with it. The woman who Estella Cantor, I think her name is, I might be getting that wrong. Excuse me, the woman that basically said, I'll marry you if you have sex with me. She would say later that I was on a date with Borges and he would go find a phone every hour. And once I followed him to see where he went, he made a phone call to his mother. And he would just update his mother on what we were doing that night on an hourly basis during a date when he's in his 30s and 40s.
For sure.
Right?
Okay.
So yeah. Now, so this is something, and again, he's living with his mother.
He didn't stuff birds, did he? They didn't manage a hotel, a motel.
Not that I'm aware of.
No, okay.
There is an interesting mashup to be made of Psycho and Borges, where it's very much like Psycho, the plot wise, but instead of murder, it's like every room is some other weird, mirror infinity labyrinth thing.
Psycho also very famously has a one-sided knife fight.
That's true. It's true. I never thought of it as a knife fight, but you're right. Yeah. Never bring a bathrobe to a knife fight. Here's another thing that starts to come on the scene. Yeah. Perón. Or Perón, Juan Perón. I don't know how much people know about this. It's a very, it's a publicly, I think if you have a good sense of history of Western Hemisphere, you're going to at least know the name. He was a guy who'd been involved in a successful coup in I have written 1973, but I'm pretty sure it's 1943. Which the purpose of the coup is partially to avoid a principal landowner in Argentina from becoming president. So Perón kind of rises up as a socialist populist. And in 1944, when there's this major earthquake that claims the lives of more than 10,000 people, Perón uses this to sort of rise to the fore and become a public figure in his sort of heroic actions to help people. Part of his rise to prominence is his wife, a radio matinee star named Eva Duarte, or Evita Perón. This Perón would dominate the next 40 years of Argentine politics in one way or another. And I'm just kind of positioning him here because a lot of stuff is going to depend on Perón. And Borges was vociferously against Perón. Like Borges was against Perón to Borges' own detriment. And we're going to see how that plays out. Um, uh, yeah. So okay. Yeah. Okay. So now, when as Perón is rising to power, Borges, as part of this SADE network and all of this, um, he's speaking out. He's speaking out in public on paper against Perón, and he's also a government employee. So as things go on, I mean, as a government employee, should you be writing articles in the widely distributed magazines and newspapers against the government? Um, I don't really know, but that's what Borges was doing. And so this ends up happening. Let me read this bit from the bio about when Perón comes to power. um, let's see if I've got it here. As a notorious anti-nationalista, Borges would have known that he was likely to lose his job. But on July 15th of, I believe that's 1944, he heard that instead of being dismissed from his post at the library, he was to be transferred on promotion to another department. The exact nature of this promotion remains in dispute. In his autobiographical essay, Borges gave the following account. In 1946, this was. In 1946, a president whose name I do not want to remember came to power. One day soon after, I was honored with the news that I had been, quote, promoted out of the library to the inspectorship of poultry and rabbits in the public markets. I went to City Hall to find out what it was all about. Look here, I said. It's rather strange that among so many others at the library, I should be singled out as worthy of this new position. Well, the clerk answered, you were on the side of the Allies. Excuse me, what did you expect? His statement was unanswerable. The next day, I sent in my resignation. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether they promoted this as an insult, like you're going to go be the head of the you're going to inspect the chickens, the poultry because you're a chicken kind of thing, or there is also some suggestion that there were people in close to Perón who liked Borges and thought, let's get him, we're not going to get rid of him, let's get him another job, and they thought that this was actually doing him a favor in some way. Whatever the case, Borges took it as an insult. And
pulling him out of the library, where he can write. Yeah,
right, exactly. Okay, so this kind of leads to, after this, he gets, encouragement from friends and things like this. He's put out the Aleph, he's put out his great collection of works, Ficciones. But in 1947, with Perón in power, he comes into probably the driest writing period. He ends up moving into the humblest home he's lived in so far, right? That all that great old family money, it doesn't last forever, right? And remember, we have to always keep in mind, until 1953, the world's just getting a little darker for him all the time. Literally, he's losing his sight slowly. One failed romance after another as he's approaching 50 years old, right?
It is really wild how money just slips away. Mm-hmm. It is such an enigma. It seems like the most concrete thing in the world, but it's a mystery, isn't it? It's worthy of Borges' story.
Is. Yeah, you could. Yeah. Right. Yeah, the dollar bill that actually, one of his last stories, called Blue Tigers, is about these stones that just reproduce inexplicably. And it's sort of like money. Yeah, but then it disappears. So like you'll pull some out of your pockets and you don't know if you're gonna have 5 or 50 or
perfect.
1 or what.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. I've had nights like that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right. Yep. So I just give you a little bit of sense of this Perón period. It's kind of crazy. They did things all over the map. This is where I was saying, as an American, like peeking in on Argentine political history, it's hard for me to locate myself. They nationalized companies owned by the French and the British. It was a lot about trying to get European influence out, right? Which is understandable. They nationalized the central bank and got out of debt with the British. They expanded Social Security. They increased wages. They tried to avoid entanglements in the Cold War by treating both sides as allies. The U.S. ended up placing embargoes on them for that. Overall, this leads to like escalating violence. Perón's a populist. But he's also mad with power, right? His wife Evita was maybe well-intentioned. It's kind of hard to say, but what she really did was played to the poorest of the poor as a sort of a almost like a Christ-like figure to her, right? She could almost like work miracles. And but at the same time, she was living very luxuriously, and they would later auction off her belongings, and it was just endless clothes, endless jewelry, and while talking about there's a class of people that were literally, it translates in English to the shirtless. She would always speak about the shirtless, right? And she's got a mansion.
Well, and these are socialists, right? Socialists in a palace. Yeah, that's always fun.
They're palace. I
love palace socialists. Very good. I like that.
Perón would be described at one point as a right-wing socialist, which is
interesting.
Which
that's
again as an American peeking in, we're like, that's like an oxymoron.
Well, it's sort of. I mean, it's the Austrian corporal. Yeah, I mean that's what it is. Right. So
probably what pushed things over the edge, at least culturally, was amidst a economic crisis, because all of this stuff, nationalizing everything, expanding everything, blah, blah, blah. Of course, it's going to lead to an economic crisis of some kind, especially when we try to do it all practically simultaneously, right? Evita dies. She was kind of the public heart, right? And then after she dies, Perón has a relationship with a teenage girl, and he plans to then also legalize divorce and prostitution, which tarnished his reputation with the Catholics. And you can't not have the Catholics on your side in South America. Not for long. On 16th of September 1955, a nationalist Catholic group from both the Army and Navy, led by General Eduardo Lunardi, General Pedro Aramburu, and Admiral Isaac Roja, led a revolt from Cordoba. They took power in a coup 3 days later, which they named the Revolución Libertadora. Perón barely escaped with his life, leaving Nelly Rivas, his teenage girlfriend, behind, and fleeing on a gunboat provided by a Paraguayan leader. Right.
And then overhead, there's a neon sign that says "The world is yours."
Right.
Scarface.
Right.
It has those vibes. I mean, he's not slinging coke, but wow. Yeah. I had to flee not me. Right. I'm Perón here. I had to flee my teenage girlfriend on a gunboat. Or else I will be killed by the people executing a military coup.
Right.
That is a bad, tough day at the office.
Tough day at the office for sure.
Man, I hate Mondays. When the coup, why couldn't you do the coup on a Friday?
Right. Yeah. Now, Perón gone. Now we got a whole sea change. Borges is a major figure. He's won the national prize. He's been an outspoken critic of Perón, so his side won. They make him director of the National Library now. They're like, all right, Borges, you'll be the director, right? So he's a major player. Now I'm going to read this brief bit about him at the library. Borges did what he could to assist the revolution. As director of the National Library, he sponsored several measures intended to overcome what he saw as the narrow-minded Philistinism of the Peronist regime. He sought funding to expand the National Library's holdings so as to repair the damage done by the petty nationalism of the Peronist era. He would shortly revive La Biblioteca, the defunct journal of the library, and he instituted a program of lectures by distinguished speakers committed to the cause of intellectual freedom. Right. So he was really trying in this job. He's got love affairs that come and go in this late period in the 50s. In 1960, he puts out a book of fiction that Aldous referred to as it's called The Maker. And then in 1961, this is where Borges catapults to fame. All right. Borges is awarded, along with Samuel Beckett, the inaugural International Publishers Prize. This is a prize put together by 6 different publishing houses, each in a different country. And the idea is they're going to award an author And then what they do is they give you the author 10 grand, and then they publish his or her books in France, Italy, Germany, Spain, England, and the US.
That is extremely cool. And by the way, this is what I'm talking about. We could still do this. It just takes money. We need patronage to do cool ideas like this. Go on.
Yeah. So he gets this award in 1961. Later that year, he teaches for a semester at University of Texas at Austin. Then he's off to lectures at Harvard.
Hook 'em horns. Let's go. All day.
Yeah.
What? He went to UT? Sweet.
He went to UT. He taught there for a semester in 1961.
Throw it up. That's where we wouldn't know each other if it weren't for the great University of Texas at Austin.
Yeah.
All day.
It was cool. It was cool. That was like the first place he went too. Like, it was like, huh, all right.
I talk a lot about Gophers in Minnesota, but Texas doesn't come up quite as much, probably because neither of us are living in Austin right now. But yeehaw, baby.
Yeehaw.
Let's go.
I'd like to imagine him with a cowboy hat,
that'd be a lot of fun.
Him gaucho hours.
McMurtry hanging out. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I didn't get him much about like what happened while he was there, unfortunately. But
he also good barbecue.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, they got good barbecue in Argentina, I think.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
He did lectures at Harvard, Yale, Columbia, the Library of Congress. He goes off to Europe. He travels a ton for a guy who's, at this point, he's 62. He's blind. His mother, who's 20 some years older than him, has to come with him as an assistant, right? By the mid 1960s, Borges is the most famous person in Argentina, right? Full stop. He's basically a household name in Argentina and rapidly becoming one worldwide, especially maybe not every household, but if anybody in the house has got an English degree, they know who Borges is. DFW talks about the fact that he grew up and there was a copy of Labyrinth, which was a UK edition of a sort of greatest hits of Borges short stories that he read. And he quickly learned that there was a year in England in the early 1970s where it was the number one selling book was Borges's Labyrinth.
That's wild.
Yeah. So he's killing it. Right. Yeah. And he would get stopped. At this point, he's getting stopped in the street by the mid 1960s. Now, as we said, he's living with his mother. Now, while he's the most famous man in Argentina, he lives in a small 2-bedroom apartment with his mother and their maid. He needs somebody around. He's blind again. His mother's not only his traveling companion, she also aids him in his dictation and his editing. Somebody would refer to it, a friend of his would refer to it as a friend of his who'd seen this happening, her helping him with his stories, referred to it. It was like watching a mother help their child with their homework.
Oh, wow.
He's very patronizing and kind of.
I have to say, though, I'm so glad that he made it in his lifetime. I'm very happy for our friend Georgie here because he seems to have suffered a great deal for this. This did not come easily for him. No.
And it's like he didn't get anything else. He didn't get. They had some money, I guess, but he never got the girl. He never, he missed out on so many different experiences. And his mother, interestingly enough, his mother was very proud of him because not only was he sort of famous, remember, she was obsessed with the family honor, the prestige of the family. Now he's the most well-known writer in the country. He's the director of the National Library. He's a well-respected man around the world. What kind of, we're not saying the name of his grandfather. Nobody knows the name of his grandfather. We know because we just did this episode, but but everybody knows the name Borges. So she's very proud of him, and I think this probably helped the dynamic to some degree. Eventually, she couldn't go on trips with him, though. She was born in 1876. By the late 1960s, she can't be schlepping off to Cambridge, for weeks at a time. She does travel with him, though. In her 80s, she gets to tour the world, which is pretty cool. But eventually it becomes clear she's not going to go. And the decision is, well, we have to get Georgie a wife. This is the solution to this. We'll get her a wife. He ends up getting married to this woman named Elsa Milan. a woman that he'd courted back in the 20s that really never came to anything. And the idea is that she's going to take care of him on his travels. And now that he's a prominent man, I assume the idea is that he's going to take care of her financially. I'm assuming that's basically what the arrangement is. This does not go well. She does not fit in with the literary friends of his. She does not understand why they're going to the places that they're going to. She doesn't really understand the whole writing thing, to be honest. So it doesn't really last. But as this is kind of coming to an end, it's miserable for Borges. He's dependent on her. Like, there were a couple times where they went someplace like Texas or whatever, and she was supposed to take care of him, and then like she's just gone. And he's just like a blind man sitting alone in a room in a foreign city.
Right. With one of the most sophisticated brains that's ever existed.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
with all
like
the
a literal
ideas rattling around. A genius.
Yeah. A literal genius just sitting in a bedroom, like not sure where the door is,
Oof.
Crazy. Right. Now around the, sometime in, sorry, in the 60s, late 60s or early 70s, he's also given a professorship at the University of Buenos Aires. And as part of this, he wants to learn Anglo-Saxon. And so he starts a group of students to come, and they'll all kind of learn Anglo-Saxon to read old English poetry. Right. He brings these people together, and there's a girl in there named Maria Kodama. This girl of Swiss, German, English, and Spanish descent, and a Japanese father. She's born in 1937, nearly 40 years before Borges. And this would be the woman that he loves in the end. This would be the Beatrice, right, that he was always looking for, Maria Kodama. Now, she is, after all of this, it's sort of heartwarming that after all of this, he gets this sort of chance with this woman, right? They have to kind of keep it under wraps because he's so famous that it would be scandalous. She's 40 years younger than him, right? It would be plastered on billboards and newspapers. And so for a long time, they basically pretend that she's his literary secretary. He has to fool his maid. The maid is very nosy and picky, and so he can't just have her over.
This is the makings of a play. It really does. Borges in a room, blind. His mother's coming and going. His young lover's coming and going.
Right.
The maid's coming and going. There you go. There's your play, your chamber play about Borges.
Right. Right. Yeah. It could be quite interesting. Right. Now,
I'd watch. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And now most of this happens. I glossed over. Mother died in 1975. 99 years old, right?
Well.
And this allowed Borges to bring the relationship with Maria Kodama more into it. Would have happened if his mother was around ever.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, all right. Well, that changes the play a little
bit. Yeah,
yeah. I'm sure good old Borges probably has his mom's voice ringing in his ears even when she's long gone.
Oh yeah. Now it was kind of a tricky relationship. They would travel together a lot. So she was his traveling companion and helping him out. They ended up having this interesting, like, they both fell in love with Iceland together. They went there, I think, they might have been on a layover the first time, but they ended up loving it. They were informally, quote unquote, married by a pagan Icelandic priest who was like supposedly like the last practitioner in Iceland of the old ways. Right. And this is something I don't think I noted as much. Borges was obsessed with England, with Europe. He was partially English. His grandmother was English, and he loved the language. He loved the literature. One of his favorite poems, I wish I had it at my fingertips, was from like 900, the year 900, written in Saxony, right? He loves this stuff. He loves the Norse mythology and all of that.
Very fun.
And So Iceland was hugely important to him, right? Getting there and sort of seeing it and feeling it and smelling it, talking to this guy who believes in the old ways. He saw Iceland too as this sort of weird, like, survivor, like it hadn't grown with the rest of Europe, but it was still European. That's kind of how he saw it. So it was like there were still remnants. It's like if you could go to an island and there was still a dinosaur living there. That's kind of what Iceland was like to him, but for the cultural traditions of very old Europe.
I feel like that whenever I go into a Midwestern Perkins I feel like there's something holding over from like the 80s or the 90s at every Midwestern Perkins, where
Yeah.
you can order pancakes and then they'll ask you what kind of muffin you want with your pancakes.
Right.
It just makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm in a section now, Kevin, called Final Decade. So we're getting there. Okay. All right. So yeah, okay. There's some political stuff going on here for sure. And most of that we're saving for the after dark, in which we're going to answer the question, why didn't uh Borges, I forgot for a second what his name was. That was weird. Why didn't Borges win the Nobel Prize? Okay. So some of this political stuff we're going to save for that. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be interesting. Some people are going to basically accuse him of being a word that gets thrown around a lot now that starts with an F. Not that one, the other one. Okay. But one thing he's doing in his last decade is writing a lot. Here's just from the last 10 years. A book of poetry called La Moneda de Hierro, a book called Dialogos, which is interviews, a conversation with another writer, a book of letters called What is Buddhism, a book of poetry called History of the Night, Prologos con un prologo de prologos. I wish I knew what prologos meant. Borges El Memorosio, which is another book of conversations. Rosa and Azul, more short stories. That's also called Blue Tigers in English. Book of lectures. Another book of lectures about 1001 Nights. Book of poetry in 1981 called La Cifra, Nuevos Ensayos Dantescos, a book of essays on Dante in 1982, and then three or four more books. He's cranking out a book like every 6 months or so as a 70-something-year-old blind man of ill health, right?
Very cool. I respect that.
Yeah. Now he's always wanting to marry officially Maria Kodama, and she's always putting it off. She says she loves him. They've finally agreed to that, but she sort of doesn't want to do it because she's very sort of strong-willed, right? She's very wants to be on her own. She doesn't want there to be any confusion about why she got married to him. She kind of doesn't want the scandal that's going to come about it, but she wants to spend this time with him. She wants to be with him. Yeah. So, and then you got to think the other side of this too. She's a young woman, 40 years younger than him. He's basically on the backside. I mean, we're not talking about a guy who got a lot of exercise, right? I don't know what the diet situation is, but his 70 is a hard 70.
I'm getting that impression. Yeah. I don't see him in the corner doing squats and planks and sit-ups.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So his body's kind of failing him. Again, this is the thing, maybe it's none of our business, but we don't even know that they ever made love. Right. He has to pretend for years that he's not in a relationship with her, as we said. And the country in which he is sort of the cultural head is increasingly in shambles. This is another part. His fate cannot be disentangled from the fate of Argentina in a certain way. Yeah.
That is so funny because we all live with that, but it's like the more famous you get, the more intensely it becomes connected to this thing that could fall apart at any minute. Yeah, it's really quite something. Yeah, to become political is a real thing.
It is. Yeah. Between and here's just an example, between 1976 and 1983 or so, Argentina had what's called the Dirty Wars, which were basically a war of suppression by a military junta, which tossed out the Peronists. So to get rid of the Peronists, it's like you have to send in the wolves to get the snakes out, right? And then now the wolves are in charge. What happens? Well, you start throwing activists out of airplanes and you start burying people in the jungle. You start cutting babies out of pregnant women's stomachs.
Oof.
And it gets ugly, right?
Yeah, I've heard about this period.
Yeah, this is where the Desperacitos come from. 30,000 people basically vanished, and most
right. And this was covered in the Bolaño episode as well.
Yeah. So this is all happening now. The trick is
Ooh.
Borges had supported the junta because he wanted Perón out. He wanted the Peronists out. And he supported the junta for a little too long. And we're going to talk more about that in the After Dark. Okay. Now into the 1980s. Argentina does have a brief period of stabilization in the 1980s in the election of this guy named Raúl Alfonso, who's been called the father of modern democracy in Argentina. And so Borges feels sort of stabilized. He's got Maria Kodama in his life. Things are going pretty well. He's writing once more. He's got this energy because he's got his Beatrice, his guiding influence and muse. He has his country's doing okay, so he feels like he doesn't have to fight for his country anymore. And he's getting honors continuously. Paris, United States. He's invited to lecture everywhere. He goes to Japan. He in a book. He and Maria eventually collaborate on a book where she takes the photos and he writes the text. It's like a travel journal called Atlas. And he says this about this period in the 80s. Maria Kodama and I have shared the joy and wonder of finding sounds, languages, twilights, cities, gardens, and people, all of them distinctly different and unique. These pages would wish to be monuments to that long adventure which still goes on. So they're having this kind of lovely moment,
I'm happy for him.
Yeah.
He doesn't
nice.
seem like a bad guy.
No, he's not.
And he clearly was gifted beyond measure and shared it with the world, even despite these problems. So that's good that he finally has this despite all the darkness. And literally
when he met Maria Kodama, I was like, oh, this is so sweet. Yeah, and you can always say age discourse and all of this, but it's like it doesn't feel like a factor here. Now in let's see, in what year was this? 1983, he writes this thing called The Confederates. I'm going to just read a bit about it. We're getting very close here. The fruit of Borges's intricate reflections on, quote, the possession of yesterday was The Confederates, which is actually, might be better. The Spanish is Los Conjurados, which I think refers more to the conspiracy or something like that. Anyway, this is a poem he would come to regard as his political testament. Written sometime in 1982 or 83, it has as its basic conceit the idea that since 1291, the year in which several cantons came together to form the Swiss Confederation, there had been a, quote, conspiracy afoot to build a tower of reason and firm, solid faith in the heart of Europe. The Confederates or conspirators are men of diverse races who profess different religions and speak diverse tongues and who have taken the odd decision to be reasonable, to forget their differences and accentuate their affinities. There are 22 cantons at present, but tomorrow the entire planet will be composed of such cantons. It may be what I say is not true. Let us hope that it is prophetic. He's basically saying to Argentina, we should be more like Europe. Europe doesn't have a junta every 10 years. Europe doesn't throw out everybody. We should be like the Swiss, is what he's trying to say. Yeah.
The Swiss are a model people. It is highly unusual. Having spent a couple of summers there, it's a very interesting, curious place that I will never understand. They tried to explain how it works to me, and no.
Right. Yeah. So
you gotta pace your juntas.
Right.
Once if there's been a junta in living memory,
don't have another.
Maybe don't have another junta.
Right. Yeah, and Borges, he has these weird things. Like he goes from being this person who's like all about the individual, right, all about democracy, and then when Perón is in power and they can't get Perón out, he's like, we shouldn't have the vote. We're gonna just vote that guy in. Like he sort of like thinks that you can't have. He has this point where he doesn't think you can have democracy until you get to a certain level of cultural sophistication, right? That was his take.
Some still dare to say as much in the group chat. And
right.
So I've heard.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It is an interesting idea that we do as an article of faith, except that the universal democratic ideal is the ideal, and any alternative to it is totally regressive. It is a matter of faith. It is like the ideological machinery operating in the sky. Right. And if you just zoom out a little bit and start to question it, it creates all sorts of Little tangles,
Right.
little problems.
Yeah.
In any case.
For sure. We're going to talk a little bit more about his politics. Remember, why didn't he win the Nobel Prize, right? Okay. Now, as the new, okay, so we had that Raul Alfonso guy come in. Even that didn't last because he couldn't really stand up to the situation. And again, you could just feel this cycle, just like, okay, things are good for a minute and then they're bad again. And he's sort of at this point in the mid 80s, early to mid 80s, he's sort of done with it, right? Borges is. Now he's being hounded by paparazzi. Which is kind of crazy and apparently Argentine paparazzi at this time was intense. There's a story in the biography about some Argentine politician. Somebody had gotten photos of him in his hospital bed and they put it on billboards just because it was like an embarrassing photo of him.
Yikes. Yeah.
And so you can imagine you're trying to not get caught up in all of that.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
And he's basically married to a woman 40 years younger than him. So that's a scandal waiting to happen.
Scandalous. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, because of all these factors, he's basically given up on Argentina. He loves the Swiss. He starts thinking about Geneva. They'd been visiting every time he'd gone to Europe. Remember, he basically grew up in Geneva, or his formative teenage years were in Geneva. And he'd taken to visiting Geneva every time he went to Europe, which was often now. It occurs to him that despite his romantic frustration that at the time in Geneva, that was the best of his life, right? And I think a lot of people think this, the teenage years were the best years of my life. And you can go on to do great things past that are better, but there's something about that period where everything is novel, everything is interesting, right? There is a magic to that time period. And so he's nostalgic for it, right?
Sure.
And so in 1985, he starts to put a plan into place. He makes a new will that leaves Maria Kodama as the sole heir to everything. The housekeeper had previously been bequeathed half of it, but she'd been too nosy and kind of ticked Borges off, honestly. And so he cut her out of the will, except for a little bit, and like $1,600 or something. Borges gave up his space in the family mausoleum. I'm not getting buried in the mausoleum. He gave up his role. He gave up his role as like a member of the family, basically. He thought that this is the sword of honor. He's just basically saying to his mother, he finally is making his act of rebellion against his mother that he should have when he was a kid, except she's dead now and he's an old man, right? And it's kind of too late for it to matter in some way, but he's sort of fighting for his last scraps of I'm Jorge Luis Borges, right? I'm not a member of the Borges family.
This is a guy who thought a lot about symbolism. So
exactly. Yeah, and he's staging his final bit. In 1985, July, he's diagnosed with cancer of the liver. He keeps this a secret from basically everyone, and because he wants to do something that according to Edwin Williamson, biographer, is going to be a commentary obvious to Argentina as a country, to his family, to everybody. And he decides that he's going to die in Geneva and he's not going to die in Buenos Aires. Now, he doesn't tell anyone that this is the plan. He doesn't tell Maria Kodama that this is the plan. I got a little bit to read. And as you can tell, we're very close to the end here. Okay. Yeah, let's see if this is right. Okay, so he does have a trip to Europe. That's official, right? But what people don't know is he's going to stay. It appears that Borges was curiously evasive about his forthcoming trip to Europe. He made no mention of it to Estela Canto, a friend of his, when they lunched together shortly before his departure. Another friend claimed that he had promised to tell her about a visit to Japan he was hoping to make after his trip to Italy and Geneva. Vilma Colina of the magazine Somos, who was at the exposition at the bookshop, reported having heard him say that he would be returning to Buenos Aires at the end of January. But other guests remember him calling out as he left, "I won't be coming back." And Roberto Alfano, who spent the morning of November 28th helping him revise the poem 1985, would later claim that they agreed to meet again the next day to finish the task, and that Borges gave him not the slightest hint that he was booked on a flight to Europe that same evening. Why was Borges playing his cards so close to the chest? There was a practical reason. As with his cancer, he must have feared that the media would get wind of his plans. But there was, I believe, a further reason for his reticence. Since he was planning to give the story of his life a particular form, he would not have wished to reduce its dramatic impact by revealing it in advance to other people. They get to where wherever they're going in Europe, and then they're just going to make a 1 or 2 night stopover in Geneva at this hotel, and with Maria. And when they're there, Borges says, we're not leaving Geneva. We're not going back at all. And he basically just explains to her that I'm going to die here. He had been unable to talk her into, he tried to talk her into it earlier, and she hadn't wanted to go, but she didn't even know about his cancer then. So finally, with the cancer in Geneva, he gets Maria to commit to 2 things. Stay here in Geneva with me until I die. I'm going to die. Could be a couple weeks, could be a year, but I'm on my way out. Stay with me here, and please finally get married to me. And she goes along with it, to getting married with him. There's some legal wrangling that's required, but she goes along with it. So he spends his last bit of time in Geneva with the love of his life, trying to create. He wants this sort of peaceful little capsule in Geneva to finally pass on. I think that might be it. That might be, well, how long? Hold on. Let me give you one thing. So, that's right. That's right. So, because they still find out, Argentina still finds out about this, right? That this is happening. Rumors leak out. It comes out that he's married to Maria Kodama. They have to have press conferences to explain this to the Argentine people, because everybody starts to hate Maria Kodama. She's just in this for the money, right? She's just in this to get after his riches and all his prestige, and he's leaving everything to her. They have to settle all of this, and it even at a distance, this peaceful capsule that they've built in Geneva to live out the final days still gets kind of punctured. But he has these final moments, and he has a lot of time sitting with Maria and talking. They have some writing projects they're working on, but you kind of know it's the end. You're not going to bust your hump every single day when you know it's kind of over. And he starts asking a lot of questions about the afterlife. He starts thinking a lot about, is death complete? Is death really the end? And he consults with both a Catholic priest and a Protestant minister. And when he dies, Maria Kodama puts on a ceremony. I think it's a Protestant minister in a Catholic church, or a Catholic priest in some kind of Protestant church. It's some kind of mix up, which is a perfectly Borgesian thing to kind of do as his final ceremony.
And it's extremely important that you don't know, was it in a Catholic church with the minister, or was it, because I don't think a Catholic church would permit, I don't know.
I should have nailed this.
No, it's
down.
Fine. You don't have to nail it, and you'll have time, and you can clarify it on the After Dark if you can figure it out on After Dark.
Yeah, I think it's in here.
That is wild, man. So it's all mixed up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something Maria Kodama put together. And clearly he hadn't become a Catholic on his deathbed, but he was clearly willing to bring that influence back into his consideration of things. I think he died as he lived, some kind of agnostic mystic, comfortable with being completely uncertain what was ultimately going to happen.
But he had to be buried in Switzerland. He wanted to die in Geneva. Yeah, I can understand that impulse, by the way.
Yeah. And it's a symbolic move, right? Because partially what he's saying to Argentina is like, I'm a son of Buenos Aires. I'm a son of Argentina, but like, I've given up on you guys. And that's heavy, man, right? Your most famous person in your country left, deliberately abandoning you to die in another country. It's a powerful move, Yeah. So that's the story of Jorge Luis Borges.
Fabulous. Thank you, Aldous Asterion, for joining us and for riding along. Thank you, Brad, for all of the preparation that you did.
Sure.
And
thank you,
all
Kevin,
of the passion.
And thank you for listening along and keeping it entertaining.
I love doing Art of Darkness, and I want to we got to thank all our listeners. We appreciate you. Patreon folks, we extra appreciate you. The financial support helps us. At this point, it's helping us buy books. At the very least, and we buy a lot of books for the pod.
We do.
So a lot of fun. We got to kind of wind down here. We're going to come back in the After Dark. I know you got some good stuff. We're going to talk about the politics, the Nobel. We're going to talk about the Romansh language Romansh language in Die Schweiz. And and then we'll also talk about that fact, that point at the end that you weren't certain about. I'd be very curious.
I'll try to find that
After
out.
Dark. That would be super cool. Good times, Brad. How do you feel? Do you feel like a weight has been? Have you, now that you've stared into the Aleph for 4 hours? How do you feel? I know you've got a little more to do, but it always feels like when you're kind of done with a core episode, you're like, whew.
Yeah, there's a certain sense of relief just because there's a lot of work goes into, putting this together so you can just rattle it off, right? And so yesterday and today a bit, and just chipping away at it and be like, did I get that right detail and blah blah blah.
Right.
And then you finally get it and you're like, I don't have to think about
there.
that.
It is. It's in the can, and it's going to go out on the internet at artofdarkpod.com and wherever you get your podcasts. A lot of fun, Brad. Who are you preparing next? Because I've got Lenny Riefenstahl.
Oh, that's right, Lenny Riefenstahl. I believe my next one is Andrei Tarkovsky.
Okay, all right. We're going. Very good. We're going to the old world now. Yeah, we just did a couple of Americans. We did Marilyn. Yeah, we did. Borges, and now I'm gonna do Lenny, and you're going to do Tarkovsky. Cool,
should be good.
So
looking forward to
stay tuned for that. I'll ask you, because you poured over this guy. What's he doing now?
See, I think he just keeps. I think he
if he is alive today in his prime, what is he doing now?
I think he keeps writing poetry and short stories, and I think the short stories get shorter and shorter. Like, I think he's narrowing in on like the sentence.
He could be tweeting. I know we say that for a lot of these writers, but like, imagine Borges just on fire
with
just
image,
like fire threads. Just killing it.
Very
interesting dude. I mean, and I wonder if he had lived another 10 or 20 years and seen the internet come into being, what his brain would have done.
Oh my God.
The dawning realization of how it would change the world.
Yeah, it's Infinity Box. Yeah, he would have. Yeah. Interesting stuff.
Amazing.
For sure.
All right, well.
All right.
Let's what sort of sound does it make when you open up the Aleph?
What?